The continuation of the story of Sister Isabella that lived in a quiet little town in the countryside of Minas Gerais, a woman of faith, who visited hell, brethren, when we left the silent, grey plain behind, and as we advanced, a new sound began to fill the void. It wasn't the seductive beat of the valley of entertainment, nor the wails of pain from the valley of lust. It was a chaotic sound, shrill, of metal clashing against metal, of shouts of rage and accusations. It sounded like a great battle, but an ugly, dishonorable battle, full of hatred and resentment. We reached the edge of a deep chasm. Below, instead of fire, there was an arena of packed earth, surrounded by jagged rocks, and in this arena, a multitude of souls were at war. They fought against each other, with pieces of wood studded with nails, with sharp stones, with their bare hands. Their bodies were covered with wounds, but they did not stop. They fought with blind fury, their faces contorted into masks of hatred. The strangest thing was that around the arena, demons were not participating in the fight. They simply sat on the rocks like an excited audience, applauding, booing, and throwing more improvised weapons at the souls, inciting them to continue the fight. Lord, what is this? A war? I asked, horrified by the senseless violence. Jesus looked at the scene with an expression of profound pain. Worse than a war, Isabella, this is my house divided against itself. This is the abyss of religious pride, the fate of all those who have used my name to promote discord, division, and strife among my children. I looked more closely and, to my amazement, recognized the faces of many who on earth were pastors, elders, ministry leaders, theologians, and prominent members of various churches and denominations. They were fighting the very people they used to argue with on earth. I saw one pastor, a man known for his doctrinal rigidity and his fiery sermons against other denominations. He had divided his own church over an argument over a minor point of theology. Now, he was forced to fight the members who had left him, using a hardcover Bible as his weapon. Each time he struck someone, a page of the book would come loose and turn into a burning ember that burned their skin. Across the arena, he saw a woman who led the prayer circle in his congregation. She was known for her spirituality, but also for her sharp tongue. She used information she heard during prayer to spread gossip and create intrigue, always with a facade of concern and pity. In hell, her tongue was a fiery serpent that came from her mouth and lashed her repeatedly, while the voices of all the people she defamed echoed in her ears, accusing her endlessly. Jesus pointed to a group fighting in a corner. Those, he said, are the ones who fought for power and position within my house. They vied for positions, titles, and recognition. On earth, they manipulated, formed cliques, and stabbed each other in the back to climb the ladder of the hierarchy. Church, now they fight for a throne made of shards of glass, and every time one of them manages to climb up, they are immediately pulled down by the others, falling onto the sharp blades. The scene was grotesque, a terrifying parody of the ecclesiastical disputes I myself had witnessed so many times, the small cliques, the gossip in the hallways, the theological debates that turned into personal attacks, the fights over the color of the carpet or the volume of the stereo. Everything that on earth seemed so small here revealed itself in its true nature, a diabolical evil that gladdened the enemy's heart. I died on the cross so that they might be one, Jesus said, and for the first time I heard a note of indignation in his voice. I prayed to the Father that they might be one, just as I and the Father are one, but they took my gospel, which is of love and reconciliation, and turned it into a weapon to hurt one another. They became more loyal to their denominations, their doctrines, and their leaders than to me. They defended their truth so proudly that they forgot to love their brother. They became so concerned with being right that they didn't care about being good, and Satan rejoices in this, because a divided church is powerless to resist him. I felt ashamed. I remembered the times I judged a brother from another church because of his customs. I remembered the times I participated in conversations where we criticized the leadership's decisions. I remembered my own pride, thinking that my way of worshipping or interpreting the Bible was the most correct. I realized that the seed of that abyss also existed within me. Jesus continued, "Tell my people that I am tired of their divisions. Tell them to stop fighting over unimportant things and start uniting on what truly matters, love for me and love for one another. What good is it to have perfect doctrine and a heart full of bitterness? What good is it to win every theological debate and lose your soul because of pride? The mark of my disciples is not doctrinal correctness, but love. This is how the world will know they are mine if they love one another. The sight of that frantic battle was one of the saddest in my entire experience, seeing those who should be brothers, united by the blood of Christ, destroying each other under the satisfied gaze of demons broke my heart. I understood that church unity is not a suggestion, it is a command, and the breaking of that unity is a sin as grave as any I had seen punished in that terrible place. The message about the unity of the church resonated deeply with me. I promised Jesus that if I returned, I would dedicate my life to being a peacemaker, a builder of bridges, not walls. We walked away from that noisy abyss and entered a place that was the complete opposite. The sound vanished, swallowed by a heavy, dense silence. The darkness returned, but it wasn't the empty darkness of before. It was a damp, cold darkness that seemed to cling to my skin. We were in a swamp. The water was black and still, like oil, and from it rose a thick mist that smelled of wet earth and rotting flowers. Above the surface of the water floated pale, colorful lights, like will-o'-the-wisps that danced slowly, promising a path, a way out. But I felt in my spirit that those lights were a trap. Many are the paths that seem right to a man, but their end is the path of death. Jesus said in a low, solemn voice, "Welcome to the swamp of illusions, Isabella, the resting place for all those who have sought power, knowledge, and spiritual solace in sources other than me." I saw a woman wading waist-deep in muddy water. On land, she was a famous seer, reading tarot cards and communicating with the spirits of the dead. People sought her for guidance, and she felt powerful, a master of the secrets of the universe. Here in the swamp, the same spirits she thought she controlled now tormented her. They appeared to her as grotesque apparitions, whispering lies in her ears, showing her visions of futures terrible and contradictory. Laughing at her despair, she tried to use her ancient rituals to banish them, but her incantations were useless. She, who had deceived so many with her false predictions, was now condemned to an eternity of deception and mental torment, never knowing what was real and what was illusion. Further on, she saw a young man. He was not a practitioner of the occult, but an avid follower of New Age philosophies. He believed in the power of manifestation, the law of attraction, the idea that he was his own God and could create his own reality. He rejected the notion of sin and the need for salvation, considering it a negative vibration. Now he ran desperately through the swamp, chasing the colored lights. Each light seemed to promise him what he desired most: power, peace, enlightenment. But each time he was about to touch one, it would move away or go out, leading him into deeper, more dangerous areas of the swamp. Underneath the water, I could see dark shapes moving, creatures with glowing eyes that watched him, waiting for him to tire. His quest for personal power had led to an eternal trap of false hope and imminent danger. Jesus explained to me, Satan is the greatest counterfeiter. He takes my truths and twists them, creating false versions that seem appealing to the human heart. I offer a relationship, he offers religion. I offer grace, he offers self-help. I offer the power of the Holy Spirit, he offers the power of the mind. He presents himself as an angel of light, offering secret knowledge, hidden powers, and self-realization. But all his doors, no matter how beautiful and illuminated they may seem, lead to this same swamp of darkness and despair. And then I saw the most frightening sight in that place. I saw a man, an incredibly talented musician who had sold millions of albums on Earth. He was submerged in black water up to his neck, unable to move. Attached to his body were dozens of creatures that looked like bloodsuckers, but were transparent, and I could see the light, his life essence, being sucked into them, as his energy was drained. For the demonic spirits he served on Earth whispered in his ears, "We gave you fame, we gave you wealth, we gave you talent, and you gave us your soul. It was a good deal, wasn't it?" The man's face was a mask of agony and regret. He had made a conscious pact with darkness in exchange for worldly success and was now paying the eternal price. What he thought was a source of power was, in fact, a spiritual parasitism that would consume him for all eternity. Seeing it, my blood ran cold. I remembered things I'd considered harmless, reading my horoscope in a magazine just for fun, playing the cup game as a teenager, having friends who believed in crystals, in hike, in all sorts of alternative therapies that promised healing and peace outside of Jesus. I'd never taken these things seriously, but there in that swamp, I understood the truth. There is no neutral ground in the spirit world. Every step we take away from the light of Christ is a step toward this swamp. It doesn't matter how innocent or well-intentioned the search, if the source is not God. The origin is the enemy. Warn my people, Isabella, Jesus said firmly. Warn them not to play with darkness, warn them to flee from modern idolatry, which is seeking a ruse, in philosophies, in the stars, or in themselves, the guidance and salvation that can only be found in me. I am the only way, the only truth, and the only life. Everything else is an illusion, a false light dancing on the waters of death. The image of that swamp has remained with me as a solemn warning about the danger of flirting with the world's spirituality, a reminder that the only sure and true source is God Himself. The warning, the thought of the swamp of illusions was like a seal on my heart. I understood that spiritual warfare was not only against frightening demons, but also against beautiful ideas and attractive philosophies that distracted from Christ. We left the cold darkness of the swamp behind, and the silence was abruptly shattered by a deafening noise. It was a metallic, industrial sound, the sound of gears grinding, hammers banging, and machines running at full steam. We stood before a gigantic factory, a dark metal structure that stretched out of sight into the colorless sky. Black smoke billowed from its chimneys, and the air smelled strongly of burning metal and electricity. The entire factory pulsed with an energy of anxiety and haste. Jesus turned to me and said, "On earth I said to my people, you cannot serve God and mammon. Welcome to the house of mammon. This is the factory of dissatisfaction, the destiny of all who have made work, money, and material possessions their gods." We entered, and the noise became almost unbearable. Inside, the factory was a maze of conveyor belts, presses, and furnaces, and everywhere, souls worked frantically. They were not being whipped by demons, their torture was the very task they performed, a task designed to be eternally frustrating. I saw a man in a suit who on earth had been the CEO of a large company. He was a typical workaholic. He lived for his work, sacrificing his health and his family on the altar of his career. He stood in front of a conveyor belt that moved at breakneck speed. On it were parts of a complex mechanism, and he had to assemble it. Before he reached the end of the line, his hands moved with desperate speed, and he was always a second away from making it. But the conveyor belt always sped up at the last moment, and the mechanism fell into a fiery pit, forcing him to start over. On his face, I saw the same expression of stress and anxiety he probably carried on earth, now elevated to a level of eternal torment. He was trapped in the cycle of almost making it forever. In another section of the factory, he saw a woman dressed in rags pushing a shiny shopping cart. On earth, she lived for appearances. Her life revolved around buying the latest fashions, the newest cell phone, the designer handbag. She went into debt, stepped over people, all to maintain a status that wasn't real. Now she was in an endless corridor, lined with display cases displaying the most beautiful and desirable objects imaginable. The cart she was pushing was full of these treasures, but her torment was this: she could have nothing for herself. Each time she reached out to take one of the items from her own as she reached the cart, it crumbled into dust. She was surrounded by everything she'd ever wanted, yet condemned to an empty and meaningless possession, a perfect representation of the hollow promise of consumerism. Jesus then showed me a couple. They seemed like ordinary people, a middle-class couple who had worked hard their entire lives. Their dream was to have the perfect house, the car of the year, to give their children everything they wanted. They made accumulating possessions the main goal of their lives. Church, God, and spiritual life were things for Sundays, if there was time left after soccer and barbecues. In hell, they were building their dream home. It was a beautiful mansion, but they built it with bricks of hot coal, which burned their hands with every touch, and, with poetic cruelty, as soon as they laid the last brick on the roof, the entire house collapsed into a pile of ash, and a demonic voice cried out, "Again. Work dignifies the soul." And they had to start over, trapped in a cycle of painful work for something they could never enjoy. The problem is not work, nor money, nor things, Jesus said as we observed the desolate scene. I myself was a carpenter. The problem is idolatry. It is when the heart of man who was created for me turns to created things. It is when the search for financial security replaces trust in my providence. It is when the desire to possess things becomes greater than the desire to know me. They laid their treasure in the earth, and thieves and rust consumed it. Where your treasure is, Isabella, there your heart will be also. Theirs was in this factory, and here they will remain. Jesus' words struck me deeply. I thought of my own life in my pottery studio. How many times have I worried more about orders than about my prayer time? How many times have my husband and I dreamed of a bigger house, a newer car, and felt a pang of envy when we saw our neighbor's prosperity? I realized that idolatry to money and work wasn't just a sin of the rich and powerful, it was a subtle trap, a weed that could grow in anyone's heart, including mine. The factory of dissatisfaction taught me that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in who possesses us, and that any search for security and happiness outside of God will inevitably end in a cycle of useless labor and eternal frustration. The image of that factory and the lesson about modern idolatry gave me a new perspective on the pressures of everyday life. I understood that the battle for my soul was fought in my daily choices, in my desires, and in my priorities. We left that noisy place and Jesus said to me, "Even you have seen the fate of those who gave in to temptations, now I will show you their origin, I will show you the enemy's war room." Suddenly, we were no longer in a valley or a factory, we were in a huge, dark room that looked like a cross between an ancient throne room and a high-tech control room. The walls were made of a polished black stone that seemed to absorb light. On one wall was a gigantic map of the world, but it didn't show countries, it showed energy flows, points of light, which I understood were churches or Christians praying, and vast areas of darkness. In the center of the room was a long obsidian table, around it sat beings of an evil and power I had never seen. These were not the cartoonish demons who tormented souls, these were princes, generals of the army of darkness. They had a noble, intelligent appearance, but their eyes burned with an age-old hatred. And at the head of the table, on a throne carved from a single piece of black crystal, sat a figure. I couldn't see his face clearly, as it was shrouded in shadow, but I could feel his authority, his superior intelligence, and his infinite arrogance. I knew, without needing to be told, that I was in the presence of Satan. Jesus was beside me, and his presence was like a shield protecting me from that aura of pure evil. He said to me quietly, "Do not fear. Just watch and listen. My people perish for lack of knowledge." One of the demonic princes stood up. He had the appearance of an impeccably dressed executive. He projected images onto the world map and began his report. "My lord, Project Divorce continues successfully. Our family dissolution rates in the West have exceeded 50%. The strategy of promoting individualism and the pursuit of personal happiness over commitment has been extremely effective. Our media agents continue to bombard minds with films and series that normalize adultery and ridicule fidelity. At the same time, our Department of Child Confusion has made remarkable progress through educational systems and cartoons, introducing concepts that destroyed the identity the enemy gave them, generating a generation of confused and emotionally unstable young people. Easy prey for us. Satan sensed her slowly, an almost imperceptible gesture. Another demon, with the appearance of a scholar, stood up. Lord Lucifer, in the field, theological, our infiltration continues. Our doubt whisperers have had great success in seminaries and universities. We are promoting a theology that denies the inspiration of the Word, that questions miracles and, most importantly, that removes the offense of the cross. We are creating a version of the way that is palatable to the world, a Jesus who is merely a good teacher, not a savior, a gospel that is about social justice, not soul salvation. The result is the creation of lukewarm churches, as the Lord foresaw, that pose no threat to our advancement. The room was filled with a cold, calculating smugness. It was frightening. This wasn't a horde of drooling monsters, it was an organized army, with strategies, departments, and goals. A third demon, who looked more like a military general, rose and pointed to the points of light on the map. "These are our main problem," he said with contempt. "Those who pray, our legions of distraction are working 24/7, we use social media. The endless stream of news, financial worries, petty offenses between brothers, anything to keep their minds occupied and their knees unbowed. We've discovered it's far more effective to neutralize them with trivial matters than with direct persecution. A busy believer is as useless to the enemy as a believer imprisoned." Finally, the figure on the throne spoke. His voice wasn't a roar, but a seductive, charismatic, and venomous sound. "Good, but not enough," he said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Time is short, he will return soon. We must accelerate, focus on the children, corrupt their innocence, for a lost generation guarantees us decades of domination. Divide the churches not with grand heresies, but with petty offenses, with pride, with power struggles. A church that fights against itself doesn't have the strength to fight against us, and above all, promote self-love as the supreme virtue. If man becomes his own god, he will have no need of our enemy. Now go." The princes of darkness bowed and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there paralyzed, processing the enormity of what I had just witnessed. The war was real, and the enemy was far more intelligent and organized than I had ever imagined. Jesus turned to me, his eyes burning with a holy light. "Now you understand, Isabella, you wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly realms." But he said, and his voice was filled with power and authority, "Do not be discouraged, for greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. His strategies are powerful, but my cross has been definitive. Victory is already assured, but the battle for souls continues, and I need my soldiers awake, dressed in all my armor, vigilant and prayerful. Go back and tell my people to wake up, tell them that the war is real, but that their general has never lost a battle, that experience changed everything. I no longer saw sin as a mere human weakness, I saw it as a weapon used by an intelligent enemy to destroy me. My prayer life, my Bible reading, my fellowship with my brothers, everything gained a new sense of urgency and purpose. I wasn't just a believer trying to be good, I was a soldier in enemy territory. The sight of the enemy's war room shook me, but strangely, it didn't leave me afraid. For the first time, for once, I understood the true dimension of the battle and the seriousness of Christ's call. My faith ceased to be passive and became active. Jesus saw the change in my spirit and with a slight smile said, "You saw their strategy? Now see mine." The darkness of Satan's enclosure dissolved like smoke, and we were transported to a place of light. It was a light so pure, so warm, so full of love that every cell in my body seemed to sing with joy. We were in what seemed like a heavenly courtyard, a threshold of paradise. The ground beneath my feet was not solid, but seemed to be made of golden, crystalline clouds. The air was filled with a melody that came from no instrument, but seemed to be the very vibration of that place. It was the music of peace, of love, of holiness. The peace I felt there was so profound that it completely erased the memory of the horror I had just witnessed. There was no pain, no fear, no anxiety. There was only the overwhelming presence of God's love. In the center of that courtyard was a great fountain, and from it gushed not water, but a liquid light that spread in rivers throughout the room. Around the fountain, angels moved with serene purpose. They carried finely crafted golden cups that glowed with an inner light. They took something invisible to me and placed it inside these bowls, which then filled with an aromatic incense whose fragrance was the most wonderful I had ever smelled. "What are they doing, Lord?" I asked in wonder. "They are collecting the prayers of the saints," Jesus replied. "Every sincere prayer, every tear from a repentant heart, every cry from one of my children on earth rises here like a sweet aroma. No prayer is lost, none is ignored. Jesus then led me to one of the walls of that place, which was like an infinite canvas. On it, I saw the same world map that was in Satan's room. I saw the areas of darkness, the demon's strategies at work, but now I saw something more. I saw a simple woman in a humble little house in Brazil, kneeling beside her son's bed, praying for his protection. As she prayed, I saw her prayer rise like a thread of golden light to heaven, where an angel collected it in a cup. Immediately, I saw a warrior angel in armor of light dispatched to the woman's house. He stood guard beside the boy, and the demons of rebellion and confusion that were circling had to retreat, unable to approach the light, who now protected the child. I saw a group of brothers in a persecuted church in China, gathered in a basement, crying out for strength and courage. Their prayers rose together like a pillar of fire, and I saw angels being sent to strengthen their hearts, to give them words of wisdom before their interrogators, and to provide for their needs supernaturally. I saw how each point of light on the map that the demonic general had disregarded was in fact a headquarters from which God's power was released on earth. Where the demons saw a problem, I now saw a source of power. The enemy wants my people to feel small, weak, and helpless, Jesus said, his voice echoing with the power of thunder and the softness of a breeze. He wants them to think their small prayers make no difference against his grand strategies, but he lies. The prayer of a righteous man avails much. A single prayer offered in faith can move mountains, change the course of nations, and dispatch legions of angels. The power I have delegated to my church is infinitely greater than all the power of hell. The problem is that my church doesn't know or believe in the power it has. That revelation filled me with a hope and courage I had never felt before. Fear was gone, replaced by an unshakable confidence in God's power and the importance of my own prayer life. I wasn't a helpless victim in war, I was an ambassador armed with the power of heaven. Finally, Jesus showed me a book. It was a huge, ancient-looking book, with a cover that appeared to be made of leather and gold. It rested on a pedestal of light. This, Jesus said, is the Lamb's Book of Life. All of heaven and all of hell fight over what is written here. Every soul that repents, every person who accepts me as Lord and Savior, has their name written here, and my greatest pleasure is to open this book on the last day and call my children home. I looked at the book with reverence and awe. I didn't need to read any names, just knowing that it existed and that my name, by God's grace, was written there was the greatest joy I had ever experienced. It was the purpose of everything, the reason for creation, the cross, spiritual warfare. It all came down to those names written in the blood of the Lamb. Jesus then looked at me with infinite tenderness and said, "It's almost time for you to return, Isabella. You've seen the reward of sin and the reality of spiritual warfare. You've seen the enemy's strategy and the power of my church. Don't forget any of this. Now go and be my witness." Those last words of Jesus, "Go and be my witness," echoed in my spirit with the weight of eternity. The blinding light of paradise began to dim, not abruptly, but softly, like a sunrise in reverse. The heavenly music faded, and the overwhelming sense of peace was replaced by an awareness of my own being. I felt the weight of my body again, the limitation of my physical form. The darkness returned for an instant, the same darkness from the beginning of the journey, and then I felt a jolt, as if my soul were settling back into my body. I opened my eyes. I was lying on my bed, in my room. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the crack in the curtain, creating a golden streak across the wooden floor. I could hear the birds singing outside and the clock ticking on the living room wall. Everything was exactly as I had left it. My head still ached a little, but it was a familiar, earthly ache. For a second, doubt tried to creep in. Had it all been a dream, a hallucination caused by the migraine and the strong medication? But then I looked inside myself. The peace of heaven was still there like a hot ember in my chest. The horror of hell was still seared into my memory with frightening clarity, and the urgency of Jesus' message burned in my soul. No, it wasn't a dream. It was more real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. I got up from the bed, my legs a little shaky. I went to the mirror and looked at my reflection. I was the same Isabella on the outside, but inside I was a new woman. My eyes saw the world differently. I no longer saw just houses, cars, and people. I saw souls. I saw an invisible war. I saw eternity at stake in every moment. A short time later, I heard the front door open. It was my husband, who had returned from his trip. He called out to me, and when I didn't answer, he came over the room. The expression of relief on his face quickly turned to concern. "Isabella, what happened? I've been calling you all day. You didn't answer. You're pale. You look like you saw a ghost." He told me I'd been unconscious for almost 24 hours. He considered calling an ambulance, but something told him to wait. I hugged him tightly and, through tears, began to tell him everything. I told him about the fall into the abyss, the unbearable smell, the valley of lust and the desert of lukewarmness. I told him about the factory of dissatisfaction and the abyss of religious pride. I told him about Satan's war room and, finally, about the glimpse of heaven and the power of our prayers. He listened to me patiently, without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long time and then said, "I don't understand everything you saw, but I know you, and I see the truth in your eyes." From that day on, everything changed. Our life, our marriage, our ministry. The message Jesus gave me was not one of fear, but of awakening. It wasn't meant to terrify us with hell, but to make us fall in love with holiness and truth. The final lesson that remained with me, and that I want to leave with you, is this: the life we live here is only a breath, a preparation for eternity, and every choice we make, no matter how small, echoes in eternity. The enemy of our souls is real, intelligent, and strategic. He attacks us with gross temptations and subtle distractions. He wants to keep us busy, divided, lukewarm, and deluded until it's too late. But our God is infinitely greater. Our general has already won the war on the cross, and he has given us powerful weapons to fight. His word, which is our sword, the prayer that moves God's arm, and love for one another, which is our greatest strength. We can no longer live a superficial Christianity. We can no longer play at being church. Jesus is coming back, and he is looking for a passionate, vigilant, pure, and united bride. He is calling us out of lukewarmness, out of idolatry, out of strife, into a deep and true relationship with him. The journey I took was terrifying, but I am grateful for it because it woke me up, and now my sole mission is to help awaken others. I shared with you the most profound and transformative experience of my life, with a completely open heart. If this journey meant something to you, if it touched a place within you that needed to be awakened, then I invite you to join our community. Subscribe here on the channel, not only to help us reach more people, but so we can continue this conversation together as a family seeking truth and strengthen each other. I've shared my story, and now I'd love to hear yours. Use the comments section below to tell us what you felt, what you learned, or perhaps an experience of your own that connects with this story. Let's turn this into a wall of testimonies, a place of encouragement and edification, and tell me honestly, what did you learn most from this video? Which of the valleys, which of the revelations speak most to your heart? Your answer is a gift to me and to our entire community. I read every comment. Thank you so much for walking with me this far. May the peace of Jesus, that peace that the world cannot give and that surpasses all understanding, guard your heart, your mind, and your home. May God bless you.